Welcome everyone to the Cost Café. Today we've got Liam Barbary, owner of Benchmark Consulting Global Limited, a specialist consultancy in flexible and rigid packaging. They've also developed the first web-based estimating and should cost modeling tool. So, Liam, thanks for joining me today. What are you drinking there?
It is a coffee, actually. So, yeah, very much in line with the Cost Cafe theme. But yeah, a very
So
nice one too.
good. Not instant stuff then.
No, actually, so this is an espresso derived coffee. So it's pretty good. I don't know if anybody else has found this during the pandemic, but you can end up with back-to-back meetings online. So being able to run over to my coffee machine, press a couple of buttons, and then leave the coffee machine to do the rest of the work for me is ideal, to tell the truth. And it's good coffee, so I can't complain. So it's nice.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Mine's. I'm having a bit of a latte this morning. I usually drink it straight black, but I think this morning I've had fairly good sleep last night, so I don't need it that strong.
Yeah, good. And no sugar?
No sugar. I don't do sugar anymore. Used to. Yeah, I used to put sugar in my frosties, which was odd. Uh, but anyway, once again, thank you for joining me. Let's go straight into it then. So let's talk about negotiations. Um, in your opinion, does open book costing work?
So for me, the short answer is yes. The thing is, it needs to be treated and handled in a careful way. So I work in the packaging industry. I used to sell packaging to some of the largest companies in the world. And open book costing is already widely used in our industry. So it's typically used at the moment with large volume global key accounts. So when you're talking about levels of volume that we're discussing here, I mean, the amount of packaging that PepsiCo and Nestle, Unilever, these types of companies are buying, it fills a factory. So that supplier becomes, or that site within that supplier becomes wholly reliant on that customer for their well-being. So in the end, when you're so invested in a customer like this, making sure that your margins are protected is absolutely critical. And we see open book costing all over in the milk industry, the dairy board. These are the farmers that provide milk. The truth of it is, those guys need somewhere around 25 pence a litre for their milk. And sometimes we, as consumers, are buying that off the shelf at 22 pence, 23 pence. And that's precluding all of the supply chain considerations that goes in. So, we can't afford for our farmers, just as the same we can't afford for our packaging suppliers to go out of business. So protecting that margin through, a very well managed open book costing platform really does work, and is, critical to the survival of a lot of suppliers, to be honest.
Does that lead to problems with price setting then, and sort of the power relationship between the supplier and and then the buyer?
Well, no. I mean, if you consider the cycle that buyers are in at the moment, buyers have an unusually hard job, particularly at global key account level. They're expected to deliver increasingly large savings year on year, and you get a talented pool of buyers that then do a great job over a number of years that they're in the role, and then the next guy comes in and he's expected to do the same. Um, and if there's already been a legacy of good, well managed procurement within that organization, what's the next guy going to do? So at a certain point, we have to accept that the price is the price and it's as good as it possibly can be. With regards to price setting, in the end, what you're accepting with open book costing is that your tender process has driven the aggressive competitive price that you wanted to achieve. And what open book costing does is locks that in throughout the relationship, and the term of the commercial relationship between the buyer and the seller, respecting, of course, that as the different cost drivers fluctuate during that agreement, they should be indexed and they should be followed, such that if you really are trading at marginal levels, as you often will be at these really competitive portfolios, at these global brands, you need to keep pace with your cost. So if your supply chain costs go up, or your raw material costs, your labor costs, energy costs, you need to be able to keep track on that on price, because really there's not a great deal of margin in some of these markets that we're trading in now. So yeah, open book costing fully protects the supplier and fully gives the confidence to the buyer that that aggressive price that he achieved in the tender is going to be maintained throughout that commercial relationship. So it really works from both sides. So from price setting, yeah, it does work. It does work.
These are sort of more, trusted these are relationship building. This is all about sort of a collaborative approach to it. Do you think there's any contradiction there then to sort of the competitive element? Some people say that doesn't work, and then does it contradict things like should cost modeling, and is there a difference in your negotiating position with each of those methods?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, first of all, it doesn't contradict should cost modeling. So the thing about open book costing, it doesn't replace the need for a regularish tender. So at the moment, in a very aggressive market, you might be inclined to run a tender every year. What open book costing does is it removes the need to do it every year, because you know that your cost elements are well managed. And if I'm honest with you, I've been doing should cost modeling in the packaging industry and estimating for over 10 years now. And really, some of those key cost drivers don't change that much year on year. I mean, raw materials, sure, but some of the other ones, not so much. So in terms of the price setting, and does it contradict, and does it make it difficult to set price? Well, absolutely not, because in the end, you've got a costing methodology that drives the price in the end, of course, and it removes any ambiguity or any lack of trust from the buyer to the supplier. So when I used to be a sales director myself, if there was a period of price increases that were required in the industry, my entire sales team would be completely lost in the process of trying to get these price increases pushed through. Now all R&D, all value engineering, all the exciting stuff that really gets us out of bed, and the stuff that hopefully makes us a bit more margin, that stuff stops, because the buyer's fully focused on this negotiating process. With open book costing, to say, does it change the negotiation? Well, yeah, it does. It removes it, because you've got a process that drives price now, not negotiation traditional style, whereby you need to have Yoda levels of body language reading skills to see if you've got the best deal. That needs to go. That we need to just have a process that drives a good price. Yeah. So yes, it does change the negotiation approach. It removes it.
But do you think that if for example you've got a long-term arrangement, that sort of a situation can change? Is it about the people first of all, to ensure that trust is established, and how do you then maintain that over a long period of time?
So rule setting is critical, and the second point is the system that drives the platform that drives this relationship. So if we look at the benchmark solution, one of the things that we do with our web-based solution is we can control the user levels and what the user can see. So in an open book costing, if you take it to its truest sense, I'm the buyer, you're the supplier, Amritpal, and I get to see all your costs. What we can do on our system, for example, and whatever solution you choose, if you go down an open book costing route, I'd highly recommend this approach, is you have the platform provider is also the policeman in the relationship that can lock those costs that neither party can then adjust, but those costs are agreed by both parties, and those margin levels are agreed by both parties, and the access to data is set by the supplier. So if there are certain costs and certain parts of that commercial relationship which the seller says, I really don't want you to see my labor rate or my energy rate or my machine hourly costs, whatever those key topics are that you really want to keep confidential, then fine, we can lock those off, keep those hidden. The buyer can still sit there with a confidence that even though he can't see the data, he knows it's controlled, he knows it's locked, and it's not being manipulated by the supplier in the background, because they just don't have the access. So I think it does come with a trust, but I don't think it would ever really work if there was a fully open book costing relationship between buyer and supplier. I don't think that trust would fully exist. In the end, let's be honest, the buyer still has a job to do, and so does the seller. And those agendas do like contradict each other in a certain way. One wants the price high, one wants the price low. So in the end, having a good system and a good process and agreed rules, um, and the platform, as I said, to support that relationship is critical. And when you get all those elements right, it works perfectly fine.
And do you think then that having sort of an online version or having the technological solution has almost provided a bit more, drive towards that transparent, regulated process because both sides can then trust it?
Yeah, I do. For the length of time that I've been doing this job, I haven't seen another solution that works quite as well. No supplier, or because we work with customers on both sides, no customer of ours, be it the producers or the buyers, really would well, none of the producers particularly would be happy really going full open book. Respecting the need for the open book relationship. In the end, I think buyers are looking to manage their portfolios and their pricing in such a way that they can tell a story back to their businesses to say, look, there is a price increase coming. I can justify where that price increase is coming from because these are things that are indexed to independent sources of data that is available to everybody. So they've got the story that they need to take back to their business to justify price increases. But most importantly for the buyers, of course, if there is a period of price decreases that the market's softening, they can also track and follow that down as well. That there's a process around the pricing mechanism that allows them to follow the market when it goes up and when it goes down as well. Most importantly. So as long as that works and the rules of the game are clear, the system support, then yeah, it does work.
So you mentioned there sort of, well, one of the interesting things is that we're in this world, we've got so much data now, there's lots of information out there. I think cost is probably slightly behind everything else in terms of data for obvious reasons. It's commercially very important to a company's strategic position. It's cost basis, it's cost based. One of the things that we found though, one of the things that's quite interesting now is that consumers or end users now have access to a lot more sources of data. So in a slight shift to what we're talking about really is discussing sort of this whole new consumer out there, the conscious choices they make, and the fact that they're not making choices just based on the lowest cost option. We've got nutritional packaging, and now one of the things that we've talked about before is looking at CO2 packaging on labeling. And one of the questions I had for you is how can
Mm.
estimators really adapt, sorry, to help with that sort of labeling of CO2?
So, as a company, we've just launched our CO2e modeling capability. It took us a couple of years to get across the finishing line. So again, with the limited options, because this topic of sustainability um, is still relatively new for most of us. I think all of us consider it to be one of the most important things in our lives going forward. Um, and the world of commerce is struggling to keep up in a certain way. So we've heard this story, this rhetoric for quite some years. We've only just now come up with a solution, and the solution that we've come up with, and again, I haven't seen many others out there that can do what we can do, but we've done it because we believe it's the best solution. So that is to say, have your CO2e modeling capability built into your cost estimating. So every time you see a cost, you also see a CO2e value. So what I would suggest for all estimators is, as best you can, whatever industry you're working in, make sure that if you can, work with your estimating tool provider to ensure that the CO2e modeling is driven from the same tool as your price modeling. So what that means is every price that you offer to your customers, you can offer two prices now. You can offer one for price sensitivity and you can offer one for environmental sensitivity. Now, it doesn't come as a big surprise that the environmental sensitivity prices might be a little bit higher, but at least you're giving the buyer an option to say, look, you can drive your CO2e down, but it might cost you an extra 2, 5, 10%. In the end, it's your choice as the buyer. At least he's being given the option, which, let's be honest, he's not being given today. And then hopefully over time, some of the estimators we work with are hugely creative in the way that they deal with price submissions to their customers. Well, they've got to be commercially if you want to really win in some of the markets we deal in. You've got to be very creative. Take that same creativity and apply it to the environmental side. Try and offer and try and think of ways to compromise with your customer that maybe they have to accept a little bit of a compromise, but you can achieve that commercially sensitive price level, albeit for a sustainable solution. I know a lot of the should cost modeling and actual cost modeling that we've done. That is possible. It takes a bit more time. You can't do it with every estimate, I grant you, but it can be done. It just takes a bit of creativity, and we're constantly helping our customers on that journey. So
I mean, it's quite interesting. I think that someone I've talked to previously, Kat Ibbotson from the Environment Agency, has looked at sort of the embodied carbon of doing maintenance, engineering, capital projects in construction, and looked at the embodied carbon of those activities. And actually, some of the interesting findings she's found is that when you provide the range of options and you take into account the CO2 emissions as well, sometimes the projects or the options with the lowest CO2 emissions also have the lowest cost associated with them, if you take into account
it's
sort of
really
whole life
interesting.
cycle as well. So it's almost like, because we're trying to say that there's other decision making criteria out there and other priorities for people as well, individual consumers as well. It's also the estimators now are in a position to use the methods and techniques they know, and it's just incorporating another data set really, and bringing that into sort of rates and everything. So I think there's a lot of traction there.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I have to say, knowing my industry and knowing the cost structures around it and the solutions that are available, and if we consider end of life, if it doesn't go to landfill, which is awfully cheap but terrible for our environment, and actually goes through a recycling stream, again, I'd be surprised with a lot of the solutions that spring to mind for me that you'd find that the environmentally friendly solution is actually the cheaper option. But that said, it's often not that much more expensive. And what we're also finding in our industry, the raw materials for recycled, feedstock is becoming a lot more expensive because it's becoming in a lot more demand. We know there's a packaging tax going to be coming out April next year. So yeah, unfortunately, these sustainable specifications are going to come at a bit of a premium, unfortunately, even considering end of life as well. But again, I sort of circle back. There's a number of different creative things that we've done and helped our customers with to basically get those costs down, because these sustainable solutions tend to be quite niche, and because they're niche, they're not produced in large quantities. Often they run at different manufacturing capabilities on the machine. So now we're having to buy more expensive raw materials. We're having to set up our machines specifically for this specification. All of these things are driving cost into that price. In the end, if you think collaboratively about bringing your maybe 2 or 3 customers together, was one thing that we did do, and we said, you're buying similar specifications, can we move you over to this more sustainable spec? At the time, because we didn't have the CO2e model, it was more to do with recyclability rather than CO2e. But we managed to achieve that because we got the procurement volume of that raw material up to a point where the unit cost came down. We were also able to dedicate one of the manufacturing machines, one of the print machines, to that specification. So now we're not changing that printer over from different specs and then driving in more setup time, because you have to do it more frequently. And you put all those things together that we did, and there are a myriad of other things that we did with the supply chain and everything else that helped bring that cost down. I mean, to offer up another solution that we helped develop with one of our other customers, again for a niche specification, they had a commercial centre of excellence, or commercial and production centre of excellence, which says that lead site within that group was responsible for procuring that material for the entire group, again trying to get that volume up and that unit price down. And then there was also that lead site took the lead on manufacturing at least part of that product. So then again, we were able to dedicate a machine to the production of that sustainable specification that we were discussing with this particular customer at the time. And again, it was all these creative things that we did to then try and drive down that cost and really mitigate the increased costs of buying a niche product. So again, just a couple of examples of the things that we did to try and mitigate those high costs really of sustainable specs. And I mean, they're just two examples of things that we've done to help our customers set up and achieve a commercially sensible price in an aggressive market. And it can be done. And again, you circle back to open book costing and things like that. Again, a bit of creativity, these things can be achieved.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think it just just thinking about in terms of being an end consumer, the number of times you've looked at, okay, do I buy 100 plastic plates for £1.50 versus 100 made from
Yeah.
sustainable banana leaf whatever for like £55, and you're there saying, as an end consumer, you're like, well, that's your decision to make. But then you have other people who are involved further in the supply chain who then have to look at the cost drivers and also balance that against, is there going to be a market for that? Is it going to be competitive? And I think it's the interesting thing going forward on how we price that. And I think the estimators will have a big part to play in that. Obviously, the biggest part is regulation
Mm.
and things like taxes and carrot and stick for different approaches, and we'll see where that goes.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I mean, look, the thing for me with estimators, estimators are often left to make very big commercial decisions when, in some instances, they're viewed as simply administrators within their organizations. Really, we should be supporting these guys. Most estimators know every corner of their business because they have to. They need to understand how the cost builds up. And they're hugely experienced and knowledgeable about the businesses that they work within. The idea for me would be to support those guys. Okay, there's an administration that needs to be done to quote prices every day. I fully respect that. But if we can somehow automate that, maybe free up the time of these really talented estimators, then, we can give them the time to think creatively. And that's a critical point for me. If we just give the time to talented people to do something creative, they will do something creative. They will think of ways of, you know, quoting on a tender more aggressively from a commercial standpoint, offering up sustainable solutions, that are good for the environment, but also, hopefully hit a price point as well. These things are all possible. The one benefit we've always had as consultants is time. If somebody gives us a project, we can spend all day on that particular topic, just thinking about it, running different scenarios, and working out the best way of doing it. Does that mean we're the most talented people in our industry at doing prices? Well, probably not. We don't know their businesses as well as they do because they work there. The difference is we give ourselves the time to do this, and that's the only difference, I think.
It's very interesting, and I think you're right. I think there's a key part that estimators have to play, but they also have to sort of meet it halfway, almost be willing to change as well with it. So
Yeah.
what I'm going to do is take a complete shift and say this is my last question. Um, what's the strangest or most interesting thing you've ever had to cost up?
Um, well, I do remember one that brought our maturity levels back to adolescence. So we helped a customer on a tender, which was for marital aid products. So that was quite interesting. So we had to do a design review and everything else to see what the specs were for the packaging and how many colours were going to be printed, etc., etc. So you can't avoid but go through the packaging designs and go through the PDFs one by one and see what we're going to be quoting on. And yeah, that's probably one of the strangest things in the packaging industry I've had to quote on. But yeah, I guess someone's got to print it, don't they? So
Well, yeah, definitely. It's someone has to do it, and it's had to be you. So
Yeah.
brilliant. Well, um, that's perfect. So thanks again for your time, Liam. It's been great having you on the show. We'll have you back on again at some point. We'll talk about sort of you mentioned about sort of the work that I think is it your father did with Kimberly Clark and all the stuff and how things have changed over time. So it'd be great to kind of talk a bit more about the evolution of the process over time and possibly where we're going in the future from your perspective. But we'll save that for another show. But
Mm.
yeah, thanks for joining me.
No, no, thank you very much for having me. It's yeah, something a bit different for a Thursday morning. So thank you very much.